On this Wednesday night, the struggle to keep up with Canada's cost of living. The inflation rate slightly deflates as food prices soar.
Everything is up. Everything.
How the low loonies not helping and what could fuel another spike in gas prices. The investigation into the killing of a BC RCMP officer.
She was compassionate and caring.
The deadly confrontation and new murder charge. The Prime Minister's greenhouse gas guarantee, his promise for 2030. And a first on the final frontier.
I feel very proud to be on board the space station.
Going where no Indigenous woman has gone before.
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight, Neetu Garcha.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. Soaring inflation has been a significant source of stress for millions of Canadians for months now, but tonight there are signs the situation may be starting to improve. Statistics Canada says the annual inflation rate dropped slightly last month to 6.9%, down from 7% in August. But food prices were up a staggering 11.7% compared to a year ago. Canadians are paying more for meat, dairy products, and fresh vegetables. Grocery bills continue to climb at the fastest rate in more than 40 years. All of this is setting the stage for another widely expected interest rate hike next week. In our top story tonight, Ross Lord explains how this is impacting Canadians and when we can expect to see some relief.
The longer inflation stays high, the more stress piles up on Erin McCullough, a single mother of 3 young children.
Everything that you bring in and that you work harder, it just seems that the world gets a little bit harder and makes it harder for some of that to go in your pocket.
To keep from drowning in debt, McCullough shops around. She works 2 jobs, and she goes without.
Anything really, movies, meals, leisure things, going out, maybe going away to a hotel for a weekend or the summer vacations are pretty local now.
A compounding impact that's being felt everywhere. Feed Nova Scotia is distributing $1 million worth of food every month to its community food banks, more than it's ever needed to before.
Pasta, we got rolled oats, peanut butter.
What worries me is not only that we have more people going hungry, more people needing food, but it's also the mental wellness, or frankly the lack of it, that runs in parallel with these trends.
Year over year, food prices increased in September to more than 11%, the fastest escalation in 41 years. Analysts, who blamed everything from pandemic-related supply chain problems to so-called greedflation, say another factor is emerging: the Canadian dollar's low exchange rate.
When you look at the list of items that have actually gone up by more than 2% in the last month, those items are most commonly imported from abroad. And when they're imported, of course, you have to negotiate in American dollars.
To try to cool inflation, the Bank of Canada is widely expected to keep increasing interest rates. But some economists suggest an erratic global energy market could drive fuel prices even higher. Some say a recession is not just possible, it's almost a given.
There's a lot of uncertainty over the outlook. We think the recession can be mild. It's not necessarily going to be a dark and ugly one just yet, but I think going forward, we have to be very careful.
For Erin McCullough, it's easier said than done.
Up. Everything is up. Everything.
The pressure is still on, and it's anyone's guess when relief will arrive. Ross Lord, Global News, Halifax.
Consumer prices are also spiking overseas, with Britain seeing overall inflation hit a 40-year high in September, thanks in large part to soaring food prices. Compared to last year, the cost of food has jumped a whopping 14.6% in the UK. That's the biggest rise since 1980. That's helped push the inflation rate to 10.1%. The new numbers helping fuel further speculation the days are numbered for embattled Prime Minister Liz Truss.
Mr. Speaker, the only mandate she's ever had is from members opposite. It was a mandate built on fantasy economics, and it ended in disaster. The country's got nothing to show for it except the destruction of the economy and the implosion of the Tory party.
Mr. Speaker, I am a fighter and not a quitter. I have acted in the national interest to make sure that we have economic stability.
Adding to her government's instability, news today that senior Tory MP Suella Braverman has been forced to resign as Home Secretary just weeks into the role over what's being described as a security breach. We are learning more tonight about the fatal stabbing of an RCMP officer in British Columbia. Constable Shaelyn Yang died following an altercation with a man who was living in a tent set up in a Burnaby park. A memorial for the fallen officer is growing outside the Burnaby RCMP detachment, where she had worked for just 3 years. Investigators now say the suspect was shot with Constable Yang's gun. Global's Grace Key is following the story for us in Burnaby tonight. Grace?
I'm at Broadview Park where the stabbing occurred. New details are emerging. The name of the suspect has now been released. He is Jongwon Ham, and he has been charged with first-degree murder in the fatal stabbing of Constable Shaelyn Yang. This all unfolded shortly after 11 yesterday morning. Constable Yang was with a City of Burnaby worker responding to a homeless tent at the park. Neighbors say the small tent has been here for several months. At some point, she was stabbed, and she did fire her weapon at the suspect. The constable was rushed to hospital, where she later died of her injuries. The BC Police Watchdog Group, the Independent Investigations Office, has obtained video from a nearby building of the entire incident. That is now under review.
At this point in time, we're not certain of the number of shots that were fired, but it's our information that she fired a shot at least at the individual who was involved, and that person, a male, went to hospital with injuries, but is expected to survive.
She was compassionate and caring, and she brought those skills every day to her job, working with her community's most vulnerable, including those experiencing homelessness and mental health issues.
Last night, there was a procession to remember Constable Yang. It stretched on for 6 minutes and included police cars and other emergency vehicles. Constable Yang was 31 years old. She had worked with the homeless and mental health outreach team. She had been with the Burnaby detachment for just 3 years. Nitu?
Grace Key in Burnaby, BC. Thanks. Today, the commission reviewing the federal government's use of the Emergencies Act in Ottawa in February heard from Diane Deans. At the time of the Freedom Convoy arriving in the nation's capital, Deans was the chair of the city's Police Services Board. She lost that post in a political battle with the mayor, Jim Watson. In her testimony, she stressed that the local police force needed help.
I definitely had the impression that we didn't have the resources to bring about an end to this occupation.
Deans also testified the former Ottawa police chief dismissed her concerns and told her he believed the protesters would leave after a few days. The federal government says one of the justifications for invoking the Emergencies Act was to respond to requests from law enforcement for more personnel and more resources. To the war in Ukraine, Russian President Putin has declared martial law in 4 regions of Ukraine that were illegally annexed last month. The move gives more power to regional governors and law enforcement in Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, and Luhansk. It also opens the door for sweeping new restrictions, including curfews, property seizure, and forced relocations. People in Kherson are already on the move. Putin says it's to ensure their protection as Ukrainian troops ramp up their fight to reclaim occupied territory. Kherson's location makes it a pivotal battlefield in the conflict. And as Crystal Goomansingh reports, Russia is struggling to counter key Ukrainian advances.
Exactly what Russian officials have told these people, we can't say for sure. Kherson has effectively been operating under Russian rule since being seized early on in the invasion. The Kremlin installed leadership says civilians have all accepted offers to be moved to safety before Ukrainian forces arrive. We have here 2 queues of people who have applied through the call center. The People's Front plans to relocate up to 60,000 people from the illegally annexed territory to Crimea or Russia. Mass deportations have been used by Russia previously in this war. Ukraine claims people are misled, often ending up in infiltration camps or missing.
Around Kherson, the situation on the ground was called difficult Tuesday by one Russian military official. Russian forces are training here, preparing to fight Ukrainian troops moving south and reclaiming territory. Meanwhile, Russia continues to hammer critical infrastructure in Ukraine. In a video message, the governor of Ivano-Frankivsk explains that a key thermal plant was hit and that residents would need to conserve energy. President Volodymyr Zelensky met with his team in Kyiv in hopes of finding ways to secure power stations while preparing for the possibility of the grid being totally disabled. Just like it did back in February, international partners are being asked to help close the sky over Ukraine. At least 3 loud explosions were reported in the capital. The Air Force says it shot down 4 missiles and 10 drones, the same deadly Iranian-made devices that wreaked havoc in the country earlier this week. Crystal Goomansingh, Global News, London.
The Iranian rock climber who made international headlines after competing in South Korea without wearing a hijab was given a hero's welcome by a cheering crowd at Tehran's airport. In the days following the competition, no one knew where the 33-year-old athlete was, triggering fears she had been disappeared by the Iranian regime. At the airport, she said she is in good health and publicly apologized for causing, quote, turbulence and worry for the people of Iran. In a state television statement at the airport, which many believe may have been made under duress, Rekabi said in the stress of competition, she forgot to put on her hijab. An Instagram post on her account previously said her hijab had fallen off. A little more than 7 years away and many tons of emissions to go. Coming up, the Prime Minister's pledge to meet a major climate goal. The Insurance Bureau of Canada says post-tropical storm Fiona was the most costly extreme weather event ever recorded on the East Coast. The destruction is still being tallied, but an initial estimate suggests the cost tops $660 million in insured damage. Many of the people affected by the storm were in high-risk areas where residential flood insurance isn't available. The storm made landfall in Nova Scotia on September 24th, but caused damage across much of Atlantic Canada. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says Canada will meet its 2030 emissions goal. In fact, he's guaranteed it. It's a bold statement considering Canada has not come close to meeting any of the previous 6 emission targets that have come and gone. Trudeau says the difference now is a robust roadmap to get there. Eric Sorensen reports.
For decades, successive Canadian governments have failed to meet Canada's emissions targets. This year, the Trudeau government produced a budget to reach its targets. When asked for guarantees at a climate forum, Trudeau didn't blink.
Can you guarantee this time will be different?
Yes.
Wonderful.
Yes, because every other plan was based on targets. Any politician can put forward a target.
Instead of targets, the government's plan budgets $9 billion in new climate investments, with incentives for homes, buildings, electric vehicles. The cornerstone is the price on carbon to rise $170 a ton by 2030. The Parliamentary Budget Office says that will eventually cost households, though rebate checks will cover much of it. In question period, Conservatives assailed carbon pricing as a cause of inflation and deficits.
And this Prime Minister's carbon tax is causing unjust inflation. Will this Prime Minister stop punishing Canadians and cancel his plans to triple the tax on groceries, gas and home heating?
The Conservative leader has been blunt, promising to scrap carbon pricing in favor of technology to address climate change.
That a Poilievre government will make life more affordable by eliminating the federal carbon tax.
A new report from Clean Prosperity suggests industry uncertainty is holding back progress. The possibility a future government could roll back carbon pricing undermines the economic case for big investments in emissions reductions. The Emissions Accountability Act aims to hold governments accountable for reductions, but if there's a change of government...
Unfortunately, there was one party that voted against this legislation, and it would be truly disgraceful for a new government to come in place and not respect the obligations under this law.
The Prime Minister is standing behind carbon pricing.
As the carbon price increases to give predictability signals to businesses to continue to invest in reducing their emissions.
And while it's not possible to guarantee that climate targets 8 years from now will be met, there was no attempt to soften that guarantee either.
Well, the latest emission target isn't going to need to be walked back again. We know exactly how we're going to make those reductions. Is it going to be easy? No. But is there a plan as to how we're actually going to make that progress? Yes.
Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
Ahead, condo chaos, why some Quebec families are about to lose their homes. For most Canadians, buying a home is the biggest investment they'll make in their lifetime. But a group of condo owners in Quebec may be losing that investment through no fault of their own. When the condos were built 3 decades ago, the contractor cut corners, and now the structure is no longer safe. As Mike Armstrong explains, dozens of families are facing bankruptcy.
It started with just normal renovation.
Oh yeah, normal renovation. We had to look at these columns.
It was supposed to be just some regular repairs. Philippe Bertrand's mother's condo building and 2 others needed work done to fix brick pillars and solidify balconies. The condo associations called in a contractor, and that's when the nightmare began.
The structure of the building is on the verge of collapsing, so I had to remove my mother from the apartment.
Now, these are videos made by engineers after the contractor said he wouldn't touch the building. It was too dangerous. Between water infiltration and termites, parts of the 3 buildings were just disintegrating.
The outside walls were all rotten.
In Claude Beauvais' building, emergency beams were put in just to stabilize the structure. Rot was just one of the issues. The engineers also found the builder had cut corners. The wall studs were too far apart, and instead of lighter concrete for the floors, he'd used heavier, regular concrete.
Well, that's a good recipe for disaster.
The walls aren't as solid as they should be, and the ceilings and floors are heavier than they should be.
Yeah.
That's not the combination you want.
No. It's pretty dangerous to live here.
Now, the other problem is the price tag. According to architects, repairing the 3 buildings would cost each owner between $200,000 and $260,000. The repair bill is more than the value of the condo.
We'll lose everything, you know.
Lori Favron paid $190,000 for her condo. She's already shelled out $32,000 for repairs, engineers, and architects, and doesn't know what happens next.
I'm faced with possibly going bankrupt.
Now, the owners argue the city and the province bear some responsibility. Both issued permits, but don't seem to have inspected properly. Well, that doesn't surprise Peter Elliott. He's a private home inspector and estimates less than 10% of new construction is ever checked.
There's no will to it, nor I believe is there a budget for it in the government.
The original builder went out of business 18 years ago, so there doesn't appear to be any recourse there.
People are scared.
Without help, Bertrand says about 80% of the owners will go bankrupt, and in the middle of a housing crisis, find themselves without a place to live. Mike Armstrong, Global News, St. Jerome, Quebec.
Another giant leap in history. Next, the woman who brought Indigenous pride to the stars. Two giant pandas have arrived at their new home in Qatar ahead of the World Cup. The pandas are a gift from China, the first ones to leave that country since the pandemic. 800 kilograms of fresh bamboo will be flown in each week for the pandas to eat. A few weeks ago, Colonel Nicole Mann took off into history as the first Indigenous woman to go to space. A member of the Wailaki of the Round Valley Indian tribes in California, the astronaut is also a former U.S. Marine test pilot. And today, she took questions from the International Space Station as her out-of-this-world achievements inspire Indigenous women and girls around the world. Here's Heather Yurex-West.
This is Nicole Mann on board the International Space Station. I have you loud and clear.
It's been 2 weeks since Colonel Nicole Mann made history, blasting off as commander of NASA's SpaceX Crew 5 mission to the International Space Station, becoming the first Indigenous woman in space.
I feel very proud to be on board the space station and certainly to represent Native Americans and Indigenous people on board. For the first stage,
Mann says seeing Earth from space has been a deeply emotional experience.
And it's difficult not to stay in the cupola all day and just see our planet Earth and how beautiful she is and how delicate and fragile she is.
But seeing Colonel Mann in space has been incredibly meaningful too.
We even have some questions from school children.
Especially for Indigenous young people, like the students of this high school science class on the Siksika First Nation near Calgary.
It was very inspiring because it's not like every day where you see Indigenous people doing a whole bunch of out of this world kind of stuff.
She's a role model for all Indigenous women that want to go into science.
Grace Cardinal Garden is an Indigenous environmental science student at Trent University with space dreams of her own.
People kind of look over you most of the time, but I think that there are a lot of people a lot of Indigenous women specifically, that are starting to go into the sciences and kind of starting to, I guess, prove a point that we can also go into those fields.
Enter them and excel, bringing to these complex disciplines the benefits of an Indigenous two-eyed lens.
They are able to use their traditional cultural knowledge as a lens to view the world, but also being able to see the world from a Western perspective.
A perspective Colonel Mann has now brought to space.
Please know that I carry your hopes and your dreams with me to the International Space Station.
The first Native American woman.
A place for Indigenous women that's no longer a foreign frontier. Heather Urex West, Global News, Calgary.
And we're not done with cosmic wonders. We'll leave you with a bold new perspective of one of them. This image of the Pillars of Creation, part of a vibrant nebula 6,500 light years away, was first captured by NASA's Hubble telescope in 1995. It later got a bit of a glow up in 2014, and today NASA shared another look from its more advanced James Webb telescope, and the results are beyond words. That is Global National for this Wednesday. Thanks for watching. Donna will be back at the anchor desk tomorrow. Have a great night.